The old car sat half swallowed by mud at the edge of a forgotten field, outside the tiny town of Black Creek. For 40 years it had been nothing more than a joke. Children threw rocks at it. Teenagers used it as a backdrop for pranks and dares. Farmers passing by would shake their heads and laugh, wondering why nobody had bothered to haul the rusted wreck away. Rain, snow, and scorching summers had beaten it down year after year, until it looked less like a vehicle and more like a relic from another age. Its roof barely rose above the weeds. One side had sunk so deeply into the earth that the driver's door was almost completely buried. To everyone in town it was simply the mud car, an eyesore with no value and no story worth telling. But what nobody realized was that, beneath the layers of dirt, rust, and decades of neglect, lay one of the greatest automotive mysteries ever hidden. The secret had remained untouched, because the one man who knew the truth had taken it to his grave. His name was Harold Vance, a quiet factory engineer who had disappeared from public life in the early 1980s. Most people barely remembered him. Those who did assumed he had lived an ordinary life and died with ordinary regrets. Yet Harold had carried knowledge that could change everything people believed about that forgotten car. The mystery began to stir one autumn morning when a young journalist named Ethan Brooks arrived in Black Creek. Ethan specialized in unusual local legends, and while researching stories for a documentary series, he stumbled upon a brief mention of the mud-covered vehicle in an old newspaper archive. The article, published in 1983, described the car as abandoned property with an uncertain history. What caught Ethan's attention wasn't the car itself, but a handwritten note attached to the archive copy. The note contained only 6 words: "Don't move it. Factory knows why." There was no signature, no explanation, just 6 cryptic words that seemed completely out of place. Most researchers would have ignored it, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the message meant something. He rented a car and drove to Black Creek the very next day. Standing before the muddy wreck, he immediately understood why everyone dismissed it. The vehicle looked hopeless. Rust covered nearly every visible surface. The windshield had shattered decades ago. Small trees grew through gaps in the chassis, yet as Ethan walked around it, something felt strange. Even beneath the corrosion, he could see traces of unusual craftsmanship. Certain panels appeared different from standard production designs. Hidden beneath mud were markings that didn't match any model he recognized. The more he examined it, the more questions emerged. What if this wasn't just an abandoned car? What if someone had wanted it forgotten? Ethan spent nearly an hour circling the mud-covered vehicle, taking photographs from every angle. The deeper he looked, the stranger things became. Most abandoned cars that had been exposed to the elements for 40 years showed predictable patterns of decay. Parts disappeared. Metal collapsed. Components were stripped away by scavengers. Yet this car seemed different. Despite being buried almost halfway into the ground, several sections appeared unusually intact. More importantly, Ethan noticed evidence that someone had visited the site long after the car had been abandoned. Near the rear wheel, hidden beneath thick grass, he discovered a rusted chain that looked far newer than the vehicle itself. It wasn't attached to anything, but it suggested that at some point, someone had attempted to secure the car, or perhaps prevent it from being moved. The discovery sent a chill down his spine. Why would anyone care enough to protect a worthless wreck sitting in a forgotten field? That evening, Ethan visited the local diner, the unofficial gathering place for Black Creek's older residents. If anyone knew the history of the car, he figured they would be there. At first, his questions were met with shrugs and laughter. Most people repeated the same story they had heard all their lives. The car had broken down decades ago, become stuck in the mud, and never left. But as the conversation continued, one elderly man sitting alone near the window began watching Ethan closely. The man's name was Walter Jenkins, a retired mechanic who had lived in Black Creek his entire life. After most of the customers had left, Walter motioned Ethan over. His expression was serious, almost uneasy. "You're asking the wrong people," Walter said quietly. "Most folks only know the story they were told." "What do you mean?" Ethan asked. Walter glanced around the nearly empty diner before leaning closer. "That car didn't get stuck. It was put there." The words hit Ethan like a bolt of electricity. "Put there? By who?" Walter hesitated. "I don't know exactly, but I remember the night it arrived. I was 16 years old. It was raining hard. 3 trucks came through town just after midnight. They weren't local. Nobody recognized them. The next morning that car was sitting in the field. Ethan stared at him, and nobody questioned it. Oh, people questioned it, but every answer led nowhere. Then a few weeks later some men from the factory showed up. They talked to the landowner privately. After that, everyone suddenly stopped asking questions. The mention of a factory instantly caught Ethan's attention. What factory? Walter lowered his voice even further. The old Raven Motor Works plant. Closed down years ago. Back then it built experimental vehicles for major manufacturers. Most records disappeared when the company folded. Experimental vehicles. The phrase echoed in Ethan's mind. Suddenly the strange note he had found in the archive made much more sense. Factory knows why. Walter reached into his coat pocket and removed a folded photograph. The edges were yellow with age. "I've kept this for 40 years, he said. Ethan carefully unfolded it. The image showed the muddy field shortly after the car had arrived. Unlike today, the vehicle was clean and clearly visible. Ethan's eyes widened immediately. The car wasn't a model he recognized. Its shape resembled a luxury coupe from the late 1970s, but several design features looked decades ahead of their time. The headlights were unusually narrow. The body lines appeared aerodynamic in ways that wouldn't become common until many years later. Most shocking of all was a small emblem mounted on the grille, a symbol Ethan had never seen before. "Do you know what that logo is?" he asked. Walter slowly shook his head. "No, but I can tell you something else. About a month after I took that photo, a man came to my house asking for the negative. What happened? I told him I didn't have it anymore." "You lied?" Walter nodded. "He offered me a lot of money, more money than I'd ever seen. When I refused, he got angry, said the picture was government property." Government property. The phrase raised even more questions. Why would a photograph of an abandoned car be considered government property? Before Ethan could ask another question, Walter reached into his pocket again and handed him a small metal object. It was a key, old, heavy, covered in scratches. "I found it in the driver's seat back in 1983. Walter said. "You kept it all these years?" "Because the men looking for the photo never asked about the key. I figured it might matter someday." Ethan turned the key over in his hand. Stamped into the metal were 3 letters, RMV, and beneath them, a serial number unlike anything he'd ever seen. For the first time, Ethan realized this story might be far bigger than a forgotten car. Because somewhere beneath 40 years of mud and silence, someone had hidden something important enough to intimidate witnesses, erase records, and keep an entire town from asking questions. And he was beginning to uncover it. Ethan barely slept that night. The old keys sat on the motel desk beside Walter's photograph, and every time he looked at them, new questions surfaced. By sunrise, he was already back in the field, standing before the mud-covered car. Morning fog drifted across the grass, giving the place an eerie silence. The vehicle seemed different now. Yesterday it had looked like junk. Today it looked like a locked vault. Somewhere inside that rusted shell could be answers hidden for 4 decades. Armed with a flashlight, gloves, and a small shovel, Ethan began carefully clearing mud from around the driver's side. The work was slow and exhausting. Years of hardened dirt clung to every surface like concrete. After nearly 2 hours, he uncovered enough of the door to inspect the handle. To his surprise, the handle wasn't rusted solid. It appeared heavily weathered, but still functional. Taking a deep breath, Ethan inserted Walter's key. For a moment nothing happened. Then he felt a faint click. His heart pounded. The lock had opened. 40 years buried in mud, and somehow the mechanism still worked. Ethan pulled the handle. The door resisted at first, as if the earth itself didn't want to let go. Then, with a loud groan of metal and a shower of dirt, it slowly opened. A musty wave of stale air escaped from the cabin. Inside, the car was frozen in time. Dust covered everything, but the interior was remarkably preserved. The dashboard looked unlike anything Ethan had ever seen in a vehicle from that era. Instead of traditional gauges, there was a series of dark rectangular panels embedded across the instrument cluster. They resembled primitive digital displays. Decades before such technology became common, strange switches lined the center console. Several had no labels at all. And then Ethan noticed something even stranger. The seats were covered in thick protective plastic, factory plastic. It was still intact. No ordinary abandoned vehicle would have remained in such condition. Someone had placed this car in the field, sealed it, and left it untouched. As Ethan examined the dashboard, his flashlight revealed a small metal plaque mounted beneath the steering wheel. Most manufacturers used identification plates containing production numbers. This plaque contained only a single line, Prototype, RMVX1. Ethan stared at the words. Prototype, not production model, not concept car, prototype. The implications were enormous. If this vehicle was truly an experimental prototype, it could explain the secrecy surrounding it. But why bury it in a field? Why not destroy it? As he continued searching, he discovered a locked compartment beneath the passenger seat. Unlike the door lock, this compartment required a different mechanism. Fortunately, years of corrosion had weakened the latch enough for Ethan to pry it open. Inside lay a weathered leather folder. His hands trembled as he lifted it out. The folder contained dozens of documents. Most were badly damaged, but several remained readable. The first page carried the Raven Motorworks logo. The second page nearly made Ethan stop breathing. At the top, in bold capital letters, were the words, Confidential. Off-word personnel. Only below that was a project title, Project Phoenix. Ethan quickly flipped through the pages. Technical diagrams. Engineering notes. Performance evaluations. The documents described technology that seemed impossibly advanced for the late 1970s. Lightweight composite materials. Electronic control systems. Experimental fuel efficiency designs. Features that would not appear in mainstream vehicles for decades. The farther he read, the more astonishing it became. This wasn't just a prototype. It was a glimpse into the future. Then a folded memo slipped from the folder and landed on the floor. Ethan unfolded it carefully. Unlike the technical documents, this memo appeared personal. It was signed by Harold Vance, the same engineer whose name had surfaced in his research. The message was brief. If this vehicle is ever discovered, the truth must be known. What happened here was never about engineering. The car became evidence. They wanted it hidden, not because it failed, but because it succeeded. Ethan felt a cold shiver run down his back. Succeeded? The prototype had worked. If that was true, why had it vanished? Why had the factory shut down? Why had records disappeared? Before he could process the revelation, a sudden sound echoed across the field. An engine. Ethan looked up. A black SUV was approaching along the dirt road. Its windows were heavily tinted. It moved slowly, deliberately. The vehicle stopped less than 50 yards away. For several seconds, nobody emerged. Then the driver's door opened. A tall man in a dark coat stepped out. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't curious. He looked like someone who already knew exactly what Ethan had found. The man glanced at the exposed car, then at the leather folder in Ethan's hands. His expression tightened. Finally he spoke. "You need to leave." Ethan stood frozen. "Who are you?" The man ignored the question. "You've already uncovered more than you should have." The warning hung in the air, and in that moment, Ethan realized the secret of the mud-covered car was not buried in the past. Someone was still protecting it. Even after 40 years, the wind swept across the field as Ethan stared at the stranger standing beside the black SUV. The man remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the leather folder in Ethan's hands. There was something unsettling about him, not because he appeared threatening, but because he seemed completely certain of himself, as if he had expected this moment for years. "You need to leave," the man repeated. Ethan tightened his grip on the folder. "I found this inside the car," he said. "Who are you?" The stranger ignored the question once again. "What you've uncovered belongs to history that was never meant to resurface." "That's not an answer." For the first time, the man's expression changed slightly. "No," he said calmly. "It's a warning." The silence that followed felt heavy. Ethan glanced toward the open driver's door. The prototype sat half-buried behind him, its secret slowly emerging after 40 years underground. He wasn't about to walk away now. "This car is a prototype," Ethan said. "Project Phoenix. Harold Vance knew something. Why was it hidden?" The stranger looked toward the vehicle. For a brief moment, something resembling regret crossed his face. "Because some inventions are dangerous." Ethan frowned. "It's a car." "No," the man replied. "It was never just a car." Before Ethan could respond, the stranger reached into his coat. Instinctively, Ethan stepped backward. But instead of a weapon, the man produced a worn photograph. He tossed it gently onto the hood of the prototype. Ethan picked it up. The image showed the same vehicle inside a brightly lit factory. Engineers surrounded it. Technicians stood nearby taking notes. At the center of the group stood Harold Vance. But that wasn't what caught Ethan's attention. The car looked completely different. Not physically, emotionally. Everyone around it appeared excited, proud, victorious, as though they had achieved something extraordinary. "What happened?" Ethan asked quietly. The stranger stared at the photograph. "They solved a problem the industry didn't want solved." The words sent a chill through Ethan. "What problem?" The stranger hesitated. Then he said something that made Ethan's heart race. "Fuel efficiency." Ethan blinked. "What?" Project Phoenix wasn't designed to be faster, it wasn't designed to be luxurious, it was designed to be independent. The stranger walked closer. Harold Vance and his team created an engine system decades ahead of its time. During testing, this prototype achieved efficiency numbers nobody thought possible. Ethan's mind raced. If that were true, the implications were enormous. Then why wasn't it released? The stranger gave a bitter smile, because success creates enemies. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Dark clouds gathered overhead. The atmosphere felt almost cinematic. The project attracted attention, the man continued. Political attention, financial attention. The moment Phoenix succeeded, powerful people realized it could disrupt entire industries. Ethan remembered Harold's note. They wanted it hidden, not because it failed, but because it succeeded. Suddenly those words made perfect sense. "You're saying somebody buried the project?" The stranger nodded. The factory received orders, funding disappeared, contracts vanished, executives changed their stories. Within months, Project Phoenix was canceled, and the car? It became evidence. The answer hung in the air. Evidence of what? Before Ethan could ask, the stranger continued. Harold refused to destroy it. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. What did he do? He smuggled the prototype out of the factory. The revelation hit, like a lightning strike. For 40 years everyone had believed the vehicle was abandoned, but Harold Vance had hidden it intentionally. The muddy field wasn't an accident. It was a hiding place, a vault, a grave, and perhaps a message to the future. Rain began falling. Tiny drops struck the rusted roof. The stranger looked toward the horizon. Harold believed someone would eventually find it. Someone like me. The man nodded. He left clues. The archive note? Yes. The documents? Yes. The key? A faint smile appeared. Yes. Everything had been deliberate. Harold had built a trail through time, a path leading to the truth. But one question still remained. "Who are you?" Ethan asked. The stranger looked directly into his eyes. "For the first time," he answered. "My name is Daniel Vance." Ethan froze. "Vance?" Daniel nodded. "Harold was my grandfather." The world seemed to stop. All this time the mysterious stranger wasn't trying to silence him. He was protecting the secret. "My grandfather spent the last years of his life waiting," Daniel said quietly. "Waiting for what?" "For someone brave enough to finish what he started." Lightning flashed across the sky. The rain intensified. Daniel stepped toward the prototype and placed his hand on the weathered metal. "Because the biggest secret isn't in these documents." Ethan stared at him. "What do you mean?" Daniel's expression turned serious. "There's something else hidden inside the car. Another compartment." Daniel slowly shook his head. "No." His voice dropped almost to a whisper. "An original factory recording." Ethan felt a surge of excitement. "A recording?" "Yes." Daniel looked directly at him. "A message from Harold himself." The rain hammered the field. Thunder echoed overhead. And for the first time since arriving in Black Creek, Ethan realized the mystery was far bigger than a forgotten prototype. Because somewhere inside the buried vehicle was the voice of the man who had hidden it. A voice that had remained unheard for 40 years. A voice capable of revealing the truth. And as Daniel Vance stared at the mud-covered car, he spoke the words that would change everything. "The recording explains why they buried Project Phoenix." He paused. "And why some people are still terrified." Several moments silently studying Ethan's garage. Their eyes moved across piles of salvaged machinery, shelves packed with components, workbenches covered in sketches, and half-disassembled equipment waiting for repair. It looked nothing like the research facility